Have you ever believed that paradise had to be expensive? That happiness was something you had to chase across oceans, hidden behind gates of billion-dollar mansions in Malibu or Cannes? For years, the world has whispered the same thing. The true luxury belonged only to the West. But what if I told you that some of the richest, most famous people on Earth are quietly walking away from that dream and building new lives in the Philippines? It started as a rumor, a kind of industry joke that no one in Los Angeles took seriously. You heard about that actor who bought a house in Palawan? Oh yeah, the one who said he wanted to disappear for a while. There was laughter, disbelief, and then silence. Because what began as one actor's escape slowly turned into a pattern, a quiet migration. One by one, the names began to surface. Producers, writers, even Oscar winners, all choosing to build homes, not in Beverly Hills or Tuscany, but along the untouched coastlines of the Philippines. The Hollywood press didn't understand it. Why would they leave California? They asked. Why the Philippines? As if the idea of peace, of belonging, of beauty beyond profit was somehow impossible to find outside the West. That question, that tone of surprise, is what made one man pause. His name was Jonathan Crane. You probably know his face. He'd starred in 3 box office hits, was once called the next George Clooney, and had everything most of us would call success. But fame is a strange currency. The more he had, the emptier he felt. Jonathan used to wake up to the Pacific Ocean view from his Malibu home. Glass walls, minimalist design, staff ready before sunrise. Yet, as he once admitted in an interview that was never aired, I had everything I wanted, but I couldn't remember why I wanted it. The sound of waves, once soothing, had become mechanical, like the hum of a machine. His friends talked about awards, crypto, new deals, but not about meaning. One evening, during a shoot in Europe, a Filipino lighting technician named Marco overheard Jonathan saying he was tired of the noise, the pressure, the emptiness. Marco smiled and said something simple that would change everything. "Sir, if you want quiet that feels alive, come to my country." Jonathan laughed at first. "Your country?" "Yes," Marco replied softly. "The Philippines. The air there doesn't just touch you, it forgives you." That sentence stayed with him. The air forgives you. He couldn't explain why, but it was the most human thing he'd heard in years. A few weeks later, after the shoot ended, Jonathan flew to the Philippines. No entourage, no paparazzi. He landed in Manila quietly and checked into a modest seaside inn in Batangas. It wasn't luxury. The room smelled of salt and coconut oil. But there was something about the people, their smiles, their unhurried laughter that felt disarming. At breakfast, a little girl at the next table waved at him. She couldn't have known who he was, but when he smiled back, she said, "Good morning, sir. Welcome home." Home. The word hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't felt at home anywhere in years. What Jonathan didn't know was that he wasn't alone. At that very moment, other Hollywood names were discovering the same thing, quietly, far from the cameras. Some came for a short break. Others for film projects, some simply to heal from broken marriages or burnout. But something about this country, this land of typhoons and sunlight, of chaos and calm, began to whisper to their hearts in a way Los Angeles never could. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about escape. It was about something deeper, the rediscovery of peace. And for Jonathan, that realization was about to become a journey that would change not just his life, but how Hollywood saw the Philippines forever. Because soon, he wouldn't just stay for a few weeks. He would build something here. A home, not of glass and concrete, but of purpose. And when he did, others would follow. Fame, when it begins to fade, doesn't do so quietly. It erodes like the edge of a cliff, slow, steady, inevitable. For Jonathan Crane, that erosion had already begun long before he ever stepped foot in the Philippines. It began the night he realized no one in his home truly knew him anymore. Not his assistants, not his agent, not even his fans. The applause was still loud, but the echo was hollow. He had spent 20 years chasing the illusion of permanence, that if you were famous enough, rich enough, you could outlast time itself. But behind the red carpets and the magazine covers, there were nights when he couldn't sleep. The noise in his mind was relentless. He had tried therapy in Los Angeles, yoga retreats in Bali, silent meditation camps in Japan. All the same result. A few hours of quiet, then the same storm returned. He had reached a point where even silence had become unbearable. It wasn't depression that haunted him. It was emptiness, a kind that success could never fill. He often found himself driving aimlessly at night through the city, past the manicured streets of Beverly Hills, past the neon billboards showing faces younger, brighter, hungrier than his. He'd stare at them and whisper, "You'll understand one day." Then came the scandals, the fake headlines, the pressure to stay relevant. His last film was panned by critics, not because it was bad, but because the world had moved on. Streaming had replaced cinema, and algorithms had replaced admiration. For someone who once believed his worth was measured in applause, it was like watching his identity dissolve in real time. He tried moving to Europe for a year. Tuscany first, the vineyards, the calm. But the quiet there was cold, detached, transactional. Then Greece, beautiful, yes, but lonely in winter. He even considered settling in Japan, fascinated by its precision and order. But everywhere he went, something felt missing. Warmth. Humanity. A sense that people still looked at you, not through you. During those years, Jonathan collected properties like souvenirs of failed attempts to start over. An apartment in Lisbon, a villa in Croatia, a rented loft in Kyoto, all beautiful, all lifeless. His manager joked once, "You're searching for a home, but maybe the problem is you keep buying houses." Jonathan didn't laugh. Deep down, he knew she was right. And then, that conversation with Marco, the Filipino lighting technician, began to replay in his mind more often. The air there doesn't just touch you, it forgives you. Forgiveness. That word had weight. He wasn't sure what he needed to be forgiven for, maybe for losing his faith in people, in love, in simple joy, or maybe for forgetting what life was supposed to feel like before fame turned it into performance. That's when he started reading about the Philippines. Not the tourist headlines, but the stories hidden beneath. How despite typhoons and poverty, people still smiled, still sang karaoke after storms, still believed tomorrow would be better. He watched a documentary about a Filipino nurse in New York who sent half her paycheck home every month and still said she was the lucky one. Lucky. That word pierced him too. How could someone with so little call themselves lucky when he, with everything, felt cursed? So when he arrived in Batangas that first time, he wasn't looking for paradise. He was looking for meaning. And what he found there, in the laughter of fishermen, in the calm of dawn, in the way strangers greeted him with genuine warmth, was something the world of fame had long forgotten. Sincerity. Still, the transition wasn't instant. Old habits die hard. He'd wake up and instinctively reach for his phone, check his emails, scroll through messages that didn't matter. Then one morning, the Wi-Fi went out for hours. No distractions. Just the sea. Just the sound of kids playing outside, waves brushing the sand, the distant bells from a small chapel. For the first time in years, He felt present. He started talking to the locals, curious about their stories. There was a tricycle driver named Luis, who told him, "Sir, we don't have much, but we always have enough to smile." There was the innkeeper, a widow named Ailing Rosa, who prayed every night for the guests who passed through her door. Because you never know what burden they carry. Jonathan didn't tell them who he was. He didn't need to. For once, he wasn't the actor, the celebrity, the face on the poster. He was just another soul passing through, looking for something real. And yet, as he began to feel the stirrings of peace, another thought haunted him. Could this last? Could a place so simple, so unguarded, truly heal someone who had spent decades performing for the world? He didn't know. But something deep inside whispered that he needed to stay a little longer to find out. Because somewhere between the crashing waves and the forgiving air, he sensed that the Philippines might not just be a place to escape. It might be a place to begin again. It was supposed to be just a few weeks, a quiet pause before returning to the life he had built, or rather the life that had built him. But weeks turned into months, and something inside Jonathan began to shift in ways he couldn't yet explain. The mornings in Batangas grew sacred to him. He'd sit by the small wooden deck, coffee in hand, watching fishermen haul their nets at dawn. The smell of sea salt mixed with the sound of laughter. It was life, unfiltered, raw, imperfect, and deeply alive. One morning, as he wandered through the market, he noticed a woman selling fruits. Her name was Lita, and she had a smile that felt as warm as sunlight after a storm. When he bought from her, she asked where he was from. "Los Angeles," he said. She nodded, not impressed, not curious about the fame attached to that word. Instead, she asked, "So, what brings you here?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." Her response was simple. "Then maybe the island will tell you." That phrase lingered in his heart for days. Maybe the island will tell you. It felt like a quiet prophecy. Around that time, a local priest invited him to a Sunday mass at a small chapel near the hilltop. Jonathan wasn't particularly religious, but something about the invitation felt different. The chapel was modest, its walls made of coral stones, its pews uneven, its ceiling patched with palm leaves. But the moment the choir began singing, their voices rising, trembling yet pure, something inside him cracked. He hadn't cried in years, but that morning, as he sat in silence, tears rolled down his cheeks. It wasn't sadness, it was release. After Mass, an elderly man approached him. "You are new here," the man said with a smile. "Yes," Jonathan replied, wiping his eyes. The old man chuckled gently. "Then let the Philippines take care of you for a while." It was such a simple sentence, yet it felt like an embrace from the universe itself. That was the turning point, the moment when the Philippines stopped being a destination and became something sacred. A mirror, perhaps, showing him everything he had forgotten about humanity. He began traveling beyond Batangas. In Cebu, he met students who dreamed of becoming filmmakers but shared one broken camera between them. They showed him short films they made on borrowed phones. Stories about family, love, resilience. Their eyes burned with passion. One of them said, "Sir, we just want to tell stories that make people feel." That line shook him. It was exactly what Hollywood had lost, the ability to feel rather than impress. In Bohol, he met a nurse who had returned home after 20 years abroad. When he asked her why she came back, she smiled. "I got tired of healing strangers while my mother was growing old alone." There was no bitterness in her voice, only peace. Everywhere he went, he found this same quiet courage. People who had little but lived with a fullness he couldn't describe. A fisherman, who offered him half his lunch just because he looked tired. Children playing barefoot on the sand, laughing as if joy cost nothing. Families who prayed together before every meal, even when that meal was just rice and fish. Jonathan began to see it, the invisible force that held this country together. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't power, it was compassion, faith. A stubborn kind of hope that refused to die, even in the face of storms. He started to write again, not scripts or roles, but letters to himself. "I think I'm learning how to breathe again," one of them read. "Not the kind of breath that keeps you alive, the kind that reminds you that you're human." It was during one of these quiet evenings, as he sat by the sea, that a group of young locals invited him to a small gathering. They played guitars, sang OPM songs under the stars, and passed around bowls of sinigang. When he joined their laughter, one of them asked, "Sir, what do you do?" Jonathan smiled and answered honestly for the first time in years. "I used to act," he said. "Now, I just try to live." The group cheered, and someone replied, "Then you came to the right place, sir." That night, as he looked up at the sky, he realized that the Philippines hadn't just welcomed him, it had humbled him. It had reminded him that real wealth was not in the walls we build, but in the hearts that open to us. He didn't know it yet, but this rediscovery, this gentle awakening, would soon inspire something far bigger. Because as word spread that Jonathan Crane had found peace in the Philippines, others would begin to ask the same question. What did he find there that Hollywood couldn't give? By the time the calendar turned another year, Jonathan Crane had already become a different man. The transformation was not marked by grand moments, but by small, almost invisible shifts. The kind that happen quietly when a restless soul finally finds rest. He no longer checked the time. He no longer cared for headlines. And when he looked in the mirror each morning, the reflection that once carried exhaustion now showed something else. Softness, calm, maybe even gratitude. He had moved from his seaside inn in Batangas to a small piece of land overlooking the ocean in Nasugbu. There, he decided to build something modest, a home made of local wood, open to the wind and the salt. He wanted it to feel like it belonged to the land, not imposed upon it. The villagers helped him. Carpenters, fishermen, even children came to lend a hand. They refused payment at first. "Sir, this is our way of saying thank you for choosing our home," one of them said. Jonathan didn't understand. "Thank you for what?" The man smiled. "For seeing what we see." That moment struck deep. For the first time, Jonathan realized what the Philippines had truly given him. Not escape, but belonging. The people didn't see him as a celebrity or a foreigner. They saw him as a neighbor, a brother, a man who had found his way back to meaning. He began volunteering at the local school, teaching English and drama to children. Every Friday, he'd gather them in a circle and say, "Don't act to impress. Act to express." The kids loved him. They didn't know his movies, and that was what made their laughter real. Once, during a school play rehearsal, a boy forgot his lines and froze. Jonathan knelt beside him and whispered, "It's okay. Just tell the story from your heart." The boy nodded, took a breath, and continued with such sincerity that the entire room erupted in applause. Afterward, Jonathan said quietly, "That's it. That's what I lost in Hollywood. The heart." He found himself drawn to the local chapel, not for faith at first, but for peace. Over time, he began to light candles, pray, and stay to talk with the parish priest. One day, during confession, he admitted, "I don't even know what I'm praying for." The priest smiled and said, "Maybe that's when prayer is most honest." Those words stayed with him. In the Philippines, even faith was gentle, not forced, not loud. It was a living thing, woven into every smile, every sunrise, every simple act of kindness. The more he lived among Filipinos, the more he understood what made this place so magnetic. It wasn't the beaches, though they were breathtaking. It wasn't the cost of living, though it was simpler. It was the people, their resilience, their laughter, their unwavering belief that no matter how dark life became, light would always find a way back. He saw it in families rebuilding after typhoons, in mothers praying for sons working overseas, in strangers who offered food to travelers without asking for anything in return. One night, a storm hit Nasugbu hard. Power lines went down, trees fell, and the sea roared like an angry beast. Jonathan's small house shook under the wind, and for a moment he felt fear, the primal kind he hadn't felt in years. But then he heard it, voices outside, singing. The villagers had gathered in the chapel, praying and singing hymns as the storm raged. He joined them, drenched, shivering, but surrounded by people holding candles and faith. It was chaos, and yet it was beautiful. Amid wind and rain, they sang, "Bayan ko, mahal ko." And Jonathan found himself crying again, not from fear, but from awe. When the storm passed the next morning, the village was battered but alive. People cleaned together, rebuilt together, and laughed as they worked. Jonathan helped too, hammering, lifting debris, carrying food. Nobody complained. Nobody asked, "Why us?" They simply said, "At least we are still here." That single phrase summed up the entire spirit of the country. At least we are still here. That night, Jonathan sat outside his home, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. He whispered to himself, "I have never seen this anywhere else." And it was true. He had traveled the world, luxury resorts, sacred temples, golden cities, but nowhere else did humanity feel this pure, this forgiving. From that day, his purpose shifted. It wasn't enough to live quietly anymore. He wanted others to know what he had found. Not the paradise of postcards, but the soul of the Philippines, a place where life was simple, but never small, where faith and kindness were not acts of charity, but ways of being. And so Jonathan began inviting friends, actors, directors, artists, to visit. "Come see it for yourself," he'd tell them. "You won't understand until you breathe its air." At first they thought it was just a phase, a midlife crisis wrapped in tropical sunsets. But when they came, they saw it too. The smiles, the warmth, the peace. Some stayed for weeks, some bought land, some never left. Hollywood began to whisper again, only this time the tone was different. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was curiosity. "Why are they moving there?" they asked. "What's happening in the Philippines?" Jonathan didn't answer with words. He simply lived, quietly, gratefully, showing through his example that the truest luxury in life was not fame, not wealth, but peace of heart. Years passed, and the whispers of Hollywood turned into conversations. Journalists began asking, "Why are so many actors suddenly drawn to the Philippines?" The answers were rarely about investment or tax breaks. It was never about luxury resorts or beachfront property. When they asked Jonathan Crane, he smiled and said softly, "Because we found something here that we lost somewhere along the way. Peace, kindness, and the feeling of home." By then, his name no longer appeared on billboards or movie posters. He didn't need it to. His life had taken on a different rhythm, one that moved with the tides, with morning prayers, with children running past his door shouting, "Tito Jonathan!" He had become part of the community, not as a guest, but as family. And though he had once been the man who couldn't sleep without noise, he now woke each morning to roosters crowing and waves brushing against the shore, whispering that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He would often sit on his porch, watching the horizon where sea met sky, and reflect on how far he'd come. The man who once lived behind security gates now left his doors unlocked. The man who once measured life by applause now measured it by moments of silence. Sometimes visitors came, producers, old friends, journalists, all curious, all searching. They expected glamour, some hidden mansion, but found simplicity instead. A wooden table, worn-out chairs, children's drawings on the walls. One of them once said, "Jonathan, you could live anywhere. Why here?" He looked out to the sea before answering, "Because here, people remember what matters." There was no performance in his tone, no poetic exaggeration, just truth. The kind that comes when you stop pretending to be someone and finally live as yourself. As the years went on, Jonathan quietly began helping build small schools and community centers in nearby villages, not under any foundation or brand, but as personal gifts. When asked why, he said, "The Philippines healed me. The least I can do is help it heal others." His generosity inspired others. Soon, a few Hollywood friends joined him. One built a medical clinic in Palawan, another funded scholarships in Cebu, another supported a film project for young Filipino artists. They didn't announce it to the press. They simply did it because they had felt what Jonathan had felt, that rare, sacred connection between gratitude and grace. One evening, while sitting with Marco, the same Filipino lighting technician who had once told him about the forgiving air, Jonathan said, "You were right, you know. The air here really does forgive you." Marco laughed. "Told you, sir. It's the only place where life still moves by heartbeats, not deadlines." Jonathan nodded. "I used to think success meant being seen, but now I know. It means being known. And the people here, they see right through you, straight to who you really are." There was a long pause, the kind that doesn't need filling. The sun dipped lower, painting the sea in gold, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had gone quiet, as if watching two souls from opposite sides of the earth, finally at peace with everything. When the first major Hollywood magazine finally published a feature about this growing trend, why Hollywood actors are buying homes in the Philippines, they expected the usual narrative: privacy, affordability, natural beauty. But what they discovered through Jonathan and others was something deeper. The article wrote, "In a world growing colder by the day, the Philippines reminds us that warmth still exists, not in the weather, but in its people." That line went viral, not because it was clever, but because it was true. Soon, more names appeared. Not everyone came to stay forever, but all left changed. Some came broken, some burnt out, some simply lost. But all left with the same revelation, that the Philippines was not a retreat. It was a renewal. Jonathan's story became a quiet legend, not the kind celebrated in award shows, but in conversations under Naipa roofs, in the smiles of locals who remembered the American actor who built a house and a heart here. He once said during an interview filmed by a small independent crew, "I thought I came here to escape, but I didn't escape anything. I came home." The interviewer asked, "What do you mean by home?" Jonathan looked down, smiled, and replied, "Home is the place that forgives you, even when you didn't know you needed forgiveness." That single line would be quoted and shared across social media, not as celebrity wisdom, but as human truth. And so the story continued, not with credits rolling, but with ripples spreading. Ripples of curiosity, admiration, and quiet pride. Filipinos around the world began sharing the story, saying, "See? The world is finally seeing us for who we are." And foreigners began to look eastward, not just for beaches or business, but for something far rarer: belonging. In a time when nations are divided and people are lonelier than ever, The Philippines stands as a gentle reminder that humanity is not lost. It's just hiding in places we forget to look. It lives in laughter shared over simple meals, in prayers whispered before dawn, in storms survived together, in hearts that love without condition. Jonathan's home in Nasugbu still stands, facing the same sea that first welcomed him. Sometimes travelers find him there, older now, slower, content. They ask him if he ever misses Hollywood. He smiles, shakes his head, and says, "No, because I finally got the role I was meant to play, myself." And as the waves kiss the shore and the sky fades into evening, you can almost hear the island whisper back the same words that started it all. The air here doesn't just touch you, it forgives you.